Welcome to Basket Talks new episode.
Every night it's there for you.
This is Mirdemir Demirer from Basket Talks.
It's constant.
In this episode, we are with Micah Lanchester.
Unlike these human beings.
Hello, Coach. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very glad to have you in my show. Thank you for accepting my invitation. And how's it going? Is everything great?
Everything's always great.
Perfect. How is your trainings going? I think it's busy season, or the busy season is coming up soon.
Everything is busy season for us, but obviously as you hit the summer, that's where it hits its peak. We don't typically have much downtime.
I really learn a lot from you, from your Instagram. First of all, thank you for sharing this kind of gems in your Instagram for free. Even it's for free in YouTube, in Instagram, you are sharing very informative content. So first of all, thank you for that. And actually, I want to know that what motivates you the most when you're developing the I'm Possible training program, and what are the key elements that make your approach to basketball training unique?
Yeah, I think the main motivation is to help players dream. Sounds cliche, but as a player who was undersized, I usually start with my story as being 4'11" as a freshman in high school. I wasn't a player that was meant to play college basketball, professional basketball. And so, in that regard, I'm a player, or was a player who had to deal with overcoming that. And so as a trainer, I focus on the same thing.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have a computer in the background that's getting a call.
No, it's okay.
But so that's how we develop our program as well. It's helping players overcome and giving them the ability to train by themselves. That's a big component of what we do.
Yeah, and you are training not only American players, you're training with players from all over the world. And you train with Cedi Osman and Furkan Korkmaz last year, right? I'm from Turkey, so they are too familiar for me. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had the opportunity to train with them over the past several years. It's both myself and Bryce Stanhope, who's my right hand, been in the I'm Possible training organization since the beginning. So for the most part, when we train NBA players, we train them as a staff because our time constraints are just simply too much. So we pass players back and forth in that way.
Yeah. Actually, when I was in Anadolu Efes, I think it was around 3 years ago, I had a chance to train with Bryce for 2 trainings, and it was unbelievable. Like, he teach us some pocket dribbles, but it translated the game really quickly. I want to hear that what are the main differences and similarities you see between young basketball players in Europe and America, like especially regarding skill development.
It's really important that we talk about what skill means. Skill means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So to me, skill is not performance. Skill is what's happening to allow for performance. Just because a player made a great decision, that decision isn't the skill itself. Different techniques and abilities were performed in order for the result to happen. So I'm not talking about the IQ side. I'm not talking about the decision-making side. I'm talking about the actual skill side. And I would say from an American to a European players, international players, are a little bit more behind on the skill side when I typically see them. A lot of times they have been taught very rigid, boxed in skills, or just kind of giving bits and pieces of what skill is, and then being thrown into game action and practices and working on the IQ side. Where a lot of times Americans have the opposite, where they're a lot of times training the skill side, but aren't given the logic, the tactics, and the IQ side. So the advantage of when we train European players is we can expand their games to a whole different level because they're being exposed to, how to play basketball, and they're given the freedom to explore their game where they're at. And so when we can give them the skills, it just takes them to a completely different level.
Well, actually, I want to ask you, for some resources, they said that 90% of the time in the game, we don't have the ball. It shows us the importance of the basketball IQ and the mental side of the game. So what strategies do you recommend for young players to improve their mental resilience and basketball IQ?
Yeah, but let's back up for a second. So I'm not a big fan of that quote. So I understand that 90% of the time you don't have the ball, but when you don't have the ball, that's also not difficult things to work on. So, it's not difficult to move without the ball. It's not difficult to cut. It's not difficult to set screens. So yeah, you need to practice and train for those things, but those aren't necessarily things that you need to spend a whole lot of time on in order to get good at. And so I think that a lot of times those stats are kind of abused, because if you truly trained at what you did 90% of the time, you wouldn't be getting very skilled in basketball. Anybody could be a good screener and move without the ball and still be a horrible basketball player. I think in order to work on IQ, though, I think film study is obviously an important piece of it. Being able to study how players approach the game, study, the level that you're trying to play at, see how the game is played at that level. So obviously film study is important. Obviously being involved in practices and games is a big part of it. You have to have the experience. You got to plug into it. But I think overall, when you become really good at training for skills, it also improves your IQ as well. So I don't know who out there knows what a drop is, but a drop is a set of footwork where my right foot will go forward, my left foot will go back, the ball will be in my right hand. That's a common technique of splitting my feet. But when a player does that, they have to have an idea of what they want out of it. So a lot of times when players are training a particular skill, they won't have an idea of what they want to do with it. So they're just moving their feet and they're moving the ball. But if you can show them the intention of a drop is to drive, now they start to get an idea, okay, when I'm doing this, that means I'm wanting to drive. That's my intention. And then after they master that intention of driving out of it, then you can give them all the different other possibilities that you can do out of that exact same technique. Out of that same technique, I can cross, I can shoot, I have all my options. So that is another example of IQ. Because out of one set of footwork, I can truly now possess 6 to 8 different options that I can do. And so you have the technique-based IQ, and then you have the game-based IQ. And I think that that's also a part of intelligence that's not being discussed a lot in basketball.
Yes. I have to say that I'm not a fan of this quote too. Just I heard it and I just wanted to start with that.
Yeah.
And as I'm possible training, you have a lot of basketball stuff. Cones, football. I don't remember the name, but something like for footwork, right?
Yeah, we call it the drill mat.
Drill mat, yes.
So it's a footwork mat that lays on the floor, allowing players to work on their footwork in basketball-specific ways.
I want to hear your thoughts about how coaches need to use it, and what's the importance of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, is you said how they should use it, because a lot of times people use products or training tools without really understanding how they should be or how they can best be used. I think the most important advice that I give people when using training tools is to not try to make them defenders. That's the most important thing. So if I'm using a cone, that doesn't mean I'm trying to make the cone represent a defender. That's not the purpose of a cone. When we grab a cone off of the floor, I wasn't imagining grabbing a defender's ankles. What I am doing is I'm using accountability to put my body in a particular position. So for how often coaches will yell at players for getting low, a lot of times players don't understand what low means. They don't know how to visually represent that or how to feel it. And so by grabbing a cone, I can put their body in that position. So now they know what low actually should feel like and what it should look like. That's a good example of why and how to use, for instance, a cone in that way. A drill mat is also very similar the way that we need to think about it. It really is nothing. It's just something that sits on the floor. So it's not getting in my way. I need to think about in a very literal sense. What it is giving me a player the idea of how they're moving their feet. And so if I tell a player that I want to move their feet short and wide, for instance, and split, a lot of times they won't have an understanding of how wide they split their feet or how long they split their feet. And so if I don't have a mat and I tell them to do it, they'll just think they did it okay. But if they do it on a mat and I record it, for instance, I can now show them that, hey, your feet aren't getting as wide as I needed them to, or I was asking you to, your feet aren't getting to these dimensions. So it gives the players what I call a frame of reference, so they know if they're actually performing footwork the way they're being asked to. And a lot of times players simply don't have control over their body, and the mat shows them if they have control over their body. So there's a variety of footworks we'll have players do using the mat, and even with NBA players, it's been extremely, extremely helpful for them to gain a better understanding of their feet.
Yes, thank you. And then what advice would you give to young coaches or players who aspire to work in the NBA, or play in the NBA? What steps are crucial to achieve this goal?
Unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for that. It's going to be different for everybody. There's the obvious things. They got to put in the work. They have to study. They have to get organized and train. And I think that's the most important piece of it, is a lot of times players are hard workers, but they're not organized workers. So they'll go and they'll get their work in, they'll get their shots in, but they don't plan anything. It's such an amazing and powerful thing when a player will even write down what they're going to do before they do it. Before they get to the gym, they know what they're going to do for their ball handling. They know what they're going to do for their shooting. They know what they're going to do for their finishing. They stay to that plan, and they treat their dream like a business. They need to have a business plan for their dream. That, to me, if I had to pick one thing from a work standpoint, a thing that we can actually control, it would be that. I can't control how athletic necessarily my cap is going to be. I obviously can't control how tall I'm going to be, but I can control how organized I am in my work ethic. So that would be the one thing that for sure you can control. There's a bunch of other things that have to play out right. You have to get the right situations. You have to find a coach and a team that will allow you to be yourself at some point. And there's a bunch of different parts of this journey that we could consider. But that's my main thing, is get organized with your work. Don't just work.
Yeah, and is your philosophy, or that the sum up of your philosophy, or how do you describe your coaching philosophy, and how does it impact the development of young players?
Yeah, my coaching philosophy is get rid of all weaknesses. That's really it. We're weakness hunters. So I'm a skill enhancement specialist, so I'm focusing on skills. There's a lot of other things that go into it. Their game IQ, learning how to play, experiencing the game, all that type of stuff. But from a skill perspective, get rid of all weaknesses that you can find. And I think a lot of times people have made that sound overcomplicated. Where you're just going to have too much to focus on. But in all reality, skills help build other skills also. So we lay out a checklist approach. If someone was to go grab our app, it's called the Real Skill app, and it goes in a checklist. And you don't care about the order. You don't have to start at the bottom and work your way up. But what you do need to do is just simply go to an item and check it off your list. And when you move through the entire list, what you're guaranteeing over time is that you're also removing all weaknesses. And when you remove your weaknesses, you are at least going to be in a situation where you can realize your potential. Potential is usually maxed out, or you hit a peak because the weaknesses haven't been dealt with. So I know that if I can get rid of a player's weaknesses, at least we're going to be able to push them to the highest level they could have reached. And if that level is the EuroLeague, awesome. If that level is a third level league, then great. But if we don't remove the weaknesses, we'll never really know how far a player will get. And if they want to get to the NBA, it's the same process. You just have to simply take those measures into your hands.
As I'm Possible Training CEO, I want to hear your background a little bit. What challenges you have faced in your career, personal career, and how have you learned from these challenges?
The main challenges that I have faced is I'm Possible Training had to create a new business in an industry that didn't have anything to copy. We had to blaze our own trail. And so whenever you're the first to do certain things, you're going to have those challenges as well. Didn't have other models to lean on. The basketball training industry wasn't really an industry when I started. And so being able to map out ways that trainers can actually do this full time was something that was pretty new. And so that was our main obstacles that we faced. I don't know if I have like an exact, this is what I learned, but the main thing was just that when you have an overall plan and a vision with things, it makes things a whole lot easier. The fact that we mapped out a plan and we had a vision for where we were going was our biggest key, because you run into obstacles and you run into roadblocks, but the plan is there. And so it gives you the ability to push through it. It's very similar to being a player when you get cut from a team, but you're wanting to play at that college level. You adapt that plan, but the vision remains the same. So I think the most important thing, and I know a lot of people would probably say similar, is that you have to have a vision for what you're doing and create a plan around accomplishing it and adapting it along the way. Yeah, but if you don't have a plan to go with that vision, you're toast.
Yeah, it's kind of similar with your answer to how to be a professional player, to organize.
Yeah, they're all interlinked for sure.
Yeah. Lastly, you talked about it a little bit, but what are the musts of basketball in 5 to 10 words?
I'll break it into small, so techniques and skills are the musts. You have to have technique and skill and accountability. If you can put those three things together, techniques, skills, and accountability for game-like movement, you got it. Everything else will start falling into place.
So, do you want to explain it a little bit, or?
Sure, but you said 10 words, so yeah. I mean, everything starts with technique. No matter what we're doing in the game of basketball, there's a technique to it. Whether or not I'm making a pass or I'm shooting or I'm dribbling, there's a technique foundation of what I'm doing. When you get really good at a technique, those techniques form into skills, which are basically the combinations of techniques and abilities. Once you have an idea of what those techniques are, you're attacking those techniques and you're forming skills, then you need to hold yourself accountable to doing those things very similar to how the game will demand. Now, that doesn't mean that you're playing the game to do it, but for instance, like I go back to my cone example, the game demands my ability to drive with my shoulder down, so I've come up with a way to hold myself accountable to do that. And now I not only have the technique and the skills, but my body's moving accountable to the game. When you do that over and over and over again with every single skill that you have, you find your way to success in basketball. So that would be the foundation of it. And so that's where my focus is, and that's where I drive people to.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for all of your answers. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon in person, in somewhere. Hope to see you.
Sounds good. Have a good one.